They announced to the entire arena that I didn't live with them anymore, convinced it was the ultimate insult to shame me into silence. They had no idea that while they were busy disowning me, I had just bought the building. The air inside the Aganis arena was thick, a humid mix of recycled air conditioning and the nervous electric sweat of 4,000 graduates. For most of the students in crimson gowns surrounding me, this was the finish line of a 4-year marathon, a moment of pure, unadulterated triumph. They were scanning the upper decks, waving frantically at parents holding oversized signs and bouquets of flowers that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. I wasn't waving. I was standing perfectly still, my hands gripping the velvet ropes of my gown, waiting for the inevitable collision. I had invited them. That was my first mistake. Some stupid, loyal part of me, the part that grew up in New Haven desperately trying to mold myself into a shape that wouldn't offend them, still hoped that Mark and Diana would show up today as parents, not critics. I hoped they would see the cum laude cord around my neck and finally realize that I was worth more than the defiance they hated so much. But as I saw them navigating through the crowd, parting the sea of students like royalty stepping through a puddle, I knew I had deluded myself. They looked immaculate, of course. Mark was wearing a charcoal suit that was tailored to within an inch of its life, his silver hair swept back in that severe, business tycoon style that made him look authoritative even when he was just ordering coffee. Diana was in a cream-colored sheath dress that screamed, New England purity, her face set in a mask of polite disdain. And trailing behind them, looking bored and checking his watch, was Caleb, my brother, the golden child, the varsity legend who had followed their roadmap to business school and never once colored outside the lines. They didn't smile when they saw me. They didn't rush over to hug me. They approached me the way a health inspector approaches a restaurant with a C rating in the window. Rowan, my mother said, her voice cutting through the dull roar of the arena. She didn't say hello. She just said my name like it was an accusation. Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad, I said, forcing a smile that felt brittle on my face. I'm glad you guys made it. I think our seats are over in section. We aren't sitting with you, Rowan, she hissed, cutting me off instantly. Her lips curled upward, not in a smile, but in that specific way she did when she smelled something sour, or when I used to talk about my writing. We have reserved seating. Caleb arranged it. I blinked, the rejection stinging more than I expected. Oh, okay. Well, maybe after the ceremony we can. Actions have consequences, my father interrupted, his voice booming enough that the family of the girl standing next to me turned to look. He loved an audience. He loved making sure people knew he was the one holding the gavel. We told you 4 years ago. You wanted to play adult. You wanted to reject our guidance and live in that filth in Allston. You don't live with us anymore. You made that clear. The words hung in the air between us, heavy and ugly. You don't live with us anymore. It wasn't new information. They had made that abundantly clear the summer before my freshman year. When I got accepted into BU on a partial scholarship, there was a brief, flickering moment where I thought they were proud. Then came the tuition bill and the housing costs. They had looked at the price of the dorms, then looked at me, and issued the ultimatum that broke us. Study what we want, live where we say, act how we tell you, or you get nothing. I chose nothing. I chose freedom. I didn't reject you, I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady as the girl next to me pretended to check her phone, clearly listening to every word. I just wanted to study literature. I wanted to be my own person. And look where that got you, Caleb chimed in, smirking. He adjusted his silk tie, looking me up and down with pity. Sitting in general admission while we sit in the VIP box. You abandoned the family, Rowan. You can't expect the perks without the loyalty. We cut her off financially because she has no concept of the real world, my mother added, addressing the air around us as if justifying her cruelty to the invisible jury she always imagined was watching. She needs to learn that life is hard. Let her sit alone. My throat tightened. It was the public nature of it that hurt the most. It was the fact that on a day meant to celebrate my survival, my ability to work 2 jobs, take full course loads, and scrape by on ramen and adrenaline, they were intent on reminding me that I was essentially an orphan in their eyes. We'll see you at the car. Or not, my father said dismissively, turning his back on me. Don't expect a dinner. We're taking Caleb to the Capitol Grill to celebrate his promotion. They walked away, a phalanx of wealth and judgment, heading toward the polished railing of the VIP section. I watched them go, feeling the familiar burn of tears prickling at the corners of my eyes. But I didn't let them fall. I took a deep breath, inhaling the stale arena air, and I let my hand drift to the pocket of my gown. Inside, against the fabric of the dress I'd bought from a thrift store, was a folded piece of paper. It wasn't my diploma. It was a receipt. My parents thought they knew everything about me. They thought I was the struggling artist, the stubborn daughter living in squalor in a crumbling Allston apartment building with 3 roommates and a radiator that clanked like a dying engine. They thought I was poor. They thought I was powerless. They thought the phrase, "You don't live with us anymore," was a weapon that would bring me to my knees. They didn't know about Grandma June. They didn't know about the meetings I'd had with the housing authority for the last 6 months. They didn't know that the filth in Allston they despised so much had gone up for sale 9 months ago. And while the other tenants were panicking about eviction, I was signing checks. As I watched my father laugh at something Caleb said, slapping him on the back, a cold, calm sensation washed over me. I wasn't sad anymore. I was anticipating. "You're right, Dad," I thought, a small, dangerous smile touching my lips. "I don't live with you anymore. I don't live with anyone. I'm the landlord." And the ceremony hadn't even started yet. Pause for a second. "I need you to be honest with me. Have you ever had people who were supposed to love you try to humiliate you instead? Have you ever had to build your own table because your family refused to give you a seat? If you know that feeling, I need you to smash that like button right now. It helps this story reach other people who need to know they aren't alone. Subscribe to the channel, and comment, "I built it," below if you're building your own future, regardless of who supports you. Now, let's see what happens when the dean takes the microphone. The plastic seat dug into the small of my back, a physical reminder of my isolation. While my classmates leaned over to whisper jokes to their families or took frantic selfies with their parents, I stared straight ahead at the stage. The spot next to me remained empty, a gap in the row like a missing tooth. Up in the VIP boxes, behind the glass and the velvet ropes, I could see the distant silhouettes of Mark, Diana, and Caleb. They weren't watching the floor. My father was on his phone. My mother was examining her nails. To them, this was just a waiting game until they could leave. Pomp and circumstance began to swell from the orchestra. A heavy, majestic sound that usually made me tear up. Today, it sounded like a battle hymn. I smoothed the fabric of my gown over my knees. My mother had called my degree useless. She had called my life in Allston playing adult. She thought the struggle of the last 4 years, the double shifts at the coffee shop, the freelance writing gigs that paid in peanuts, the nights I chose between heat and textbooks was just a rebellious phase. She didn't understand that the struggle was the forge. The ceremony dragged on in a blur of speeches about the future and potential. I clapped when I was supposed to, stood when instructed, and watched hundreds of names get called. When it was finally my turn, I walked across the stage with my head high. I shook the dean's hand, accepted the diploma folder, and waited for the flash of the camera. I didn't look up at the VIP box. I didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me search for their approval. I returned to my seat, the adrenaline fading into a dull ache. I thought it was over. I thought we would just toss our caps, and I would head home to my building, and celebrate with my tenants, who had become more of a family to me than my own blood. But Dean Thorne didn't step away from the podium. "Please be seated." His voice boomed, echoing through the massive speakers. The shuffling of thousands of gowns quieted down. "Before we conclude, we have a deviation from the standard program. Usually, we reserve our specific accolades for the departmental awards dinner. However, this year, the administration felt compelled to highlight a unique achievement." I froze. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird in a cage. This was it. "We talk often about community at Boston University," the dean continued, adjusting his glasses. "We talk about the responsibility our graduates have to the city that hosts us. Often, this is theoretical, but one student has taken it upon themselves to turn theory into practice in a way that has humbled us." I risked a glance upward. In the box, my parents had stopped looking at their phones. My father was leaning forward slightly, frowning, likely wondering why the ceremony was dragging on. Caleb looked bored, swirling a drink in a glass. They had no idea the ground was about to shift beneath their expensive Italian loafers. "This student," the dean said, his voice gaining strength, "faced a housing crisis that threatened to displace dozens of Allston residents, including fellow students. Instead of fleeing, she dug in. The air in the arena changed. The boredom vanished, replaced by a collective curiosity. "Will Rowan Gaffar please return to the stage?" The sound of my name hit the air like a thunderclap. Up in the box, I saw my mother's head snap toward the stage so fast it was almost comical. Her mask of indifference cracked, replaced by confused irritation. I stood up, my legs shaking, and began the long walk back to the microphone. Walking up the steps to the stage felt different the second time. The first time, I was a student hoping not to trip over the hem of my gown. Now, I felt grounded. Heavy. Real. Dean Thorne smiled as I approached, stepping aside to give me space next to the podium, placing me front and center before the sea of crimson robes. 9 months ago, the dean continued, his voice echoing into the hush of the arena, a multi-unit building in Allston was put on the market. It is a building many of you know. It houses seniors, working families, and 12 of our own undergraduates. Developers were circling, ready to offer cash, planning to evict everyone, and turn the units into luxury condos. A low murmur went through the crowd. This was a familiar story in Boston. Everyone knew the fear of gentrification. The sudden notice on the door. The scramble to find a place to sleep before the semester started. But the developers didn't count on Miss Gaffar, Thorne said, gesturing to me with a sweeping hand. Using her own savings and a private inheritance, Rowan partnered with the Boston Housing Initiative. She didn't just organize a protest, she put down a down payment. I looked up at the jumbotron. My face was projected there, 10 feet tall, looking calm despite the storm inside me. But I wasn't looking at myself. I was looking past the screen, squinting against the lights, focusing entirely on the VIP box. Ladies and gentlemen, the dean announced, his voice swelling with pride. I am proud to introduce you to the youngest co-owner of a residential building in Allston history. Furthermore, she has legally pledged to freeze rents for all current student tenants for the next 5 years. For a split second, there was silence, total, stunned silence, as the information processed. Then, the arena erupted. It wasn't the polite golf claps from earlier, it was a roar. Students were standing up, cheering, stomping their feet on the concrete floors. The parents in the general seating, the ones who knew the crushing weight of tuition and housing costs, were clapping the hardest. It was a wave of validation that washed over me, warm and overwhelming, drowning out 4 years of being told I was worthless. But I didn't care about the applause. I cared about the 3 people in the VIP box who were currently frozen in a tableau of absolute shock. Mark had dropped his phone. It sat on the ledge of the box, forgotten. His mouth was slightly open, his face drained of color, his authoritative composure shattered. Diana was gripping the railing so hard her knuckles were white, her eyes wide, staring at me as if I had suddenly grown horns. And Caleb? The golden child looked like he had been punched in the gut. He was staring at his parents. Then at me, a look of dawning horror on his face. They were stone-faced, furious. This wasn't the narrative they had written. I was supposed to be the failure. I was supposed to be the cautionary tale they told their friends about at the country club. Poor Rowan. She just couldn't hack it. Instead, I was the hero of the day. And they were just the people who had refused to sit with me. Congratulations, Rowan, the dean said, shaking my hand again, this time with a firmness that spoke of respect between equals. Your university is incredibly proud. Thank you, Dean, I said, my voice magnified by the mic, ringing clear and strong. I walked off the stage, the applause still thundering in my ears. I knew what was coming next. The confrontation. They wouldn't be able to help themselves. They would need to know how. They would need to know where the money came from, and I couldn't wait to tell them. The exodus from the arena was a chaotic river of black gowns and bright bouquets. Every few feet, a stranger would stop me, parents I didn't know, students I'd never spoken to shake my hand or slap my shoulder. That was amazing. A girl with a finance degree whispered to me, her eyes wide. I pay $2,000 for a closet in Fenway. You're a legend. I smiled and thanked them, but my eyes never stopped scanning the crowd. I knew the sharks were in the water. I just needed to see the fins before they attacked. I didn't have to wait long. I had just stepped out into the bright afternoon sun on Commonwealth Avenue, the humidity hitting me like a physical weight. When I saw them, they weren't moving with the slow, celebratory drift of the other families. They were marching. Mark led the way, his face a mask of tight, controlled fury. Diana was half a step behind him, her purse clutched under her arm like a weapon. Caleb trailed them, looking less angry and more confused, his brow furrowed as he tried to piece together a puzzle he didn't have all the pieces for. They cut through a group of taking photos without saying excuse me, zeroing in on me with terrifying precision. "Rowan!" my father barked. It wasn't a greeting. It was a summons. I stopped near a concrete planter, letting the crowd flow around us. I wanted to be in public. I wanted witnesses. "Hello, Dad." "Mom." My mother didn't waste time on pleasantries. She stepped into my personal space, the scent of her expensive Chanel perfume, usually comforting, now suffocating, clouding the air. Her eyes were hard, glittery beads of malice. "What was that?" she hissed, her voice low and venom slick. "What was that little performance in there?" "It was an award, Mom," I said, keeping my voice level. "I thought you'd be happy. You always said I should make something of myself." "Don't play coy with me," she snapped. "You bought property? A building? In Boston?" She said the words, as if I had confessed to running a cartel. "With whose money, Rowan? Did you steal from us? Did you open credit cards in our names?" "That's the only explanation," my father cut in, his face reddening. "There is no way a barista with a useless English degree secures a commercial loan. You committed fraud, didn't you? You dragged our name into some illegal scheme, and now you're flaunting it in front of the dean?" "I didn't steal a dime from you," I said calmly. "I haven't taken money from you in 4 years. You made sure of that." "Then how?" Caleb asked. He spoke for the first time, stepping out from behind our father. His voice wasn't angry, just incredulous. "Rowan, that building. I know the market. That's a 7-figure deal. Even with a loan, the down payment alone." I looked at Caleb, then at my parents. I saw the fear behind their anger. They weren't just mad. They were terrified that they had lost their leverage. They were scared that the narrative of me being the helpless, foolish daughter was dissolving. "I saved," I said. "Every shift, every scholarship check. I ate ramen for 3 years." "That's not enough," Mark scoffed. "Don't lie to me." "And," I continued, my eyes locking onto my mother's, "I used Grandma June's inheritance." The silence that followed was instant and absolute. It was the kind of silence that happens right before a car crash, the moment you realize the brakes aren't working. My mother went pale. My father's jaw locked. "What?" Caleb whispered. "What inheritance?" The silence on the sidewalk was heavy, suffocating, broken only by the distant honking of cars on Commonwealth Avenue. My mother's mouth opened and closed like a fish on a hook. My father, usually so quick with a rebuttal or a legal threat, looked as though he'd been struck by lightning. But it was Caleb who shattered the quiet. He turned slowly toward our parents, his face flushing a deep, mottled red. The confusion in his eyes was hardening into something sharper: betrayal. "You got an inheritance?" Caleb blurted out, his voice cracking. He looked back at me, then at them. "They told me she left everything to them. They said you were cut out completely. They told me Grandma June was disappointed in you, Rowan. They said she wrote you out of the will before she died." People around us turned to listen. A family taking graduation photos near the T-stop lowered their camera. A group of students paused, sensing the radioactive levels of tension radiating from our circle. My parents froze, caught, exposed, cornered. They hadn't just lied about money. They had weaponized a dead woman's memory to drive a wedge between my brother and me. They had painted a picture of me as the family pariah, rejected even by the grandmother who had taught me how to read, just to keep Caleb in line. Just to keep their golden child from asking why his sister was struggling while they bought new cars. "Caleb, lower your voice," my father hissed, stepping forward with a menacing glare. "This is a private family matter. We were protecting you. We were protecting the family assets." "Protecting?" I laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "You were hoarding. You were lying." "She was senile," my mother snapped, her composure finally cracking. The polished socialite facade dissolved, revealing the desperate, controlling woman underneath. "June didn't know what she was doing. Giving that kind of money to a child? To someone who refuses to listen to reason? We were going to contest it. We should have contested it. But you couldn't," I said, stepping closer. I wasn't afraid of them anymore. The fear had evaporated the moment I signed the deed to my building. Because she didn't just leave it to me. She put it in a trust you couldn't touch. She left it to me because she didn't trust you with it. My mother let out a sound that was half gasp, half shriek. "How dare you? We took care of her." "You managed her image," I corrected. "You visited when people were watching. I visited when she was lonely." "She knew who you were, Mom. She knew you'd try to use the money to control Caleb, Just like you use his tuition. And she knew you'd try to starve me into submission. We did not starve you, my father bellowed, losing his temper completely. His face was a mask of rage. We taught you responsibility. And this is how you repay us? By sneaking around behind our backs? By buying a slum building to play landlord? It's not a slum, I said coldly. And I'm not playing. By now, we had drawn a full crowd. Smartphones were out. I could see the little red recording lights blinking in the afternoon sun. My parents, usually so obsessed with their public image, were too deep in their meltdown to notice they were becoming a viral moment. You are ungrateful, my mother spat, tears of rage welling in her eyes. After everything we've done. You are dead to us, Rowan. Do you hear me? I heard you the first time, I said, my voice steady, though my hands were trembling slightly. You said it in the arena. You don't live with us anymore. I took a step back, creating a physical boundary to match the emotional one I had just erected. And you're right, I don't. My mother's eyes darted around the circle of onlookers. She finally registered the phone's dozens of black rectangles held up like mirrors reflecting her own ugliness back at her. For a woman who had spent her entire life curating a perfect image of upper-middle-class benevolence, this was worse than death. This was exposure. Put those away! She shrieked, lunging toward a sophomore girl who was recording nearby. You have no right. This is private. The girl stepped back, startled, but didn't stop recording. Diana, stop, my father warned, grabbing her arm. He saw what she didn't. The tide had turned. We weren't just a family argument anymore. We were a spectacle. A viral moment waiting to be uploaded to TikTok. The Karen meltdown of graduation day. Don't touch me! Diana pulled away from him, her composure shattering completely. It was the villain breakdown I had waited my whole life to see. The mask was gone. There was no poise, no grace, just raw, unfiltered entitlement. She turned back to me, her face contorted. You planned this, you little snake. You brought us here to humiliate us. I brought you here to celebrate, I said, my voice cutting through her hysteria. You did the rest yourselves. Is everything all right here? 2 security guards in bright yellow event staff jackets pushed through the crowd. They weren't police, just large men tired of dealing with graduation chaos. But their presence loomed large. This woman is harassing us, my father lied instantly, pointing a trembling finger at me. We are trying to leave, and she is blocking our path. The lead guard looked at me in my cap and gown, clutching my diploma and then at my parents, red-faced, screaming, and aggressive. He didn't need a detective's badge to figure out the dynamic. Sir? The guard said, his voice flat and bored. It looks like you're the ones causing a scene. You need to keep it moving. You're blocking the exit flow. Do you know who I am? My father started, puffing up his chest. I am a donor to this. I don't care if you're the mascot, the guard interrupted, stepping between us. Move it along, or we'll have you escorted off campus for disorderly conduct. My father's mouth snapped shut. Being escorted out by security was a humiliation he couldn't survive. He straightened his jacket, trying to salvage a scrap of dignity from the wreckage. Fine, he spat. He turned to Caleb, grabbing his shoulder. Come on, Caleb. We're leaving. The car is this way. Caleb didn't move. He stood rooted to the pavement, staring at our parents as if he were seeing them for the first time. The sunlight hit his face, highlighting the confusion and hurt warring in his eyes. Caleb, my mother snapped, her voice shrill. Now, Caleb looked at Mark's hand on his shoulder. He reached up, gripped our father's wrist, and firmly removed it. No, Caleb said. His voice was quiet, but it carried. My parents froze. This was twist number 2 inches action, the golden child, the investment, the clone he was malfunctioning. Excuse me? My father whispered. I said no, Caleb repeated, taking a step toward me. I'm not going to dinner. I'm not going anywhere with you right now. You lied to me. About Grandma. About Rowan. About everything. You are making a mistake, my mother warned, her voice trembling with a mix of rage and panic. If you stay with her, you know what happens. The support stops. The car, the apartment, it all stops. Caleb looked at me. He looked at my cheap thrift store dress under my gown. He looked at the diploma in my hand. Then he looked back at them. Keep it, Caleb said. My parents stood there for 1 second longer, stripped of their power, stripped of their children, and stripped of their pride. Then, with the cameras still rolling, they turned and fled, disappearing into the crowd like rats scrambling for the sewer. The space where our parents had stood felt like a crater, smoking and empty. The crowd, sensing the main event was over, began to disperse, returning to their own celebrations, their own families, their own happy endings. Caleb remained rooted to the spot. He was staring at the bumper of a passing taxi, his eyes unfocused. The adrenaline that had propelled him to defy Mark and Diana was draining away, replaced by the visible tremors of shock. He looked younger than 22. He looked like the little brother I used to shield from thunderstorms before we were pitted against each other in the coliseum of our parents' expectations. "Caleb?" I said softly. He blinked, turning his head slowly toward me. "They lied," he murmured, his voice sounding hollow. "About Grandma. She didn't hate you. She didn't write you out." "No," I said. "She didn't. And the money." He ran a hand through his hair, messing up the gel. "I've been driving the Audi she bought for business purposes. I've been letting them pay my rent because they said it was my inheritance advance. But it wasn't, was it? It was their money. Strings attached. Strings attached to everything," I confirmed. He let out a long, shaky breath. "I don't have a ride. I don't have my wallet. It's in the car." "You have legs," I said, nudging his shoulder with mine, a gesture we hadn't shared in a decade. "Come on. I'm taking you home." "Home?" He looked confused. "You mean, to the dorms?" "No," I smiled, a genuine, proud smile. "To my building." We took the Green Line. It was crowded, noisy, and hot, the exact opposite of the air-conditioned leather interior of our father's sedan. Caleb looked out of place in his expensive suit, clutching his diploma like a shield, jostled by tourists and Red Sox fans. He didn't complain. He just held on to the overhead strap, staring at his reflection in the dark window as the train rattled underground. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "Somewhere between Kenmore and Packard's Corner." He wasn't looking at me. "I thought you were just being stubborn. I thought you hated us." "I never hated you, Cal," I said, leaning against the door. "I just hated the cage." We got off in Allston. The neighborhood was gritty, vibrant, and alive. Music thumped from passing cars. The smell of grease from local diners mixed with the exhaust of the city. To my parents, this was a slum. To me, it was paradise. We walked 3 blocks until we reached the corner of Gardner Street, and there it was. It was a 4-story brick walk-up, classic Boston architecture, with a fire escape zigzagging down the front. It wasn't a shiny glass tower. The brick was weathered, and the entryway needed a fresh coat of paint. But the flower boxes in the windows were blooming with marigolds, and the front door was solid oak. It looked sturdy. It looked safe. "This is it?" Caleb asked, stopping on the sidewalk. He looked up at the facade, his expression unreadable. "This is it," I said. I pulled a heavy ring of keys from my pocket, not just a tenant key, but the master set. The weight of them in my hand was the best feeling in the world. "Welcome to my empire." I unlocked the front door and held it open for him. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, standing on the threshold between his old life and my new reality. Then, he stepped inside. The lobby smelled of lemon oil and old wood, a sharp, earthy contrast to the antiseptic, floral scent that always permeated our parents' house. I watched Caleb take it in. He was looking for cracks in the plaster, for rats in the corners, for anything that would validate the horror stories Mark and Diana had spun for years about my destitute life. Instead, he found Mr. Henderson checking his mail. "Afternoon, Rowan," the elderly man said, tipping his flat cap. "That plumber came by about the radiator in 4C. Said the pressure valve is fixed." "Thanks, Mr. Henderson," I replied, shifting my diploma to my other hand. "Let me know if it acts up again tonight. I don't want Mrs. Gable getting cold." "Will do. Congratulations on the graduation, by the way. We're all real proud of you." "Thanks." We walked past him and up the stairs to the second floor. Caleb was silent, his expensive dress shoes clicking loudly on the hardwood treads. I could feel his worldview tilting on its axis. He had expected me to be a squatter, a helpless girl living in filth. Instead, he was watching tenants treat me with respect. He was realizing that while he was playing the role of the successful son, I had actually become a successful adult. I unlocked Unit 2B, my unit. It wasn't a penthouse. It was a 1-bedroom with exposed brick walls, a heavy oak bookshelf I'd refinished myself, and a small kitchen that smelled like coffee and vanilla. It was warm. It was lived in. It was mine. Caleb stood in the center of the living room, looking at the framed photos on my wall, friends he didn't know, places he'd never been. He looked at the stack of notebooks on my desk, the tools of the trade he had been taught to mock. This is. He trailed off, gesturing vaguely at the sunlight streaming through the clean windows. Not a crack den? I offered, tossing my cap onto the couch. Do you want water? Tea? Scotch? He asked weakly, loosening his tie. I have peppermint tea, I said, ignoring the request. I went to the kitchen, filling the kettle. You know, they told me you were doing great. Caleb is crushing it at Wharton. Caleb is interning at Goldman. They made you sound like a machine. I felt like one, he admitted. He sank onto my thrifted velvet armchair, looking utterly exhausted. I hate business school, Rowan. I hate it. I wanted to study architecture. I turned around, the kettle forgotten. Since when? Since high school. But Dad said architects are just glorified artists who don't know how to pour concrete. So, finance it was. He put his head in his hands, his voice muffled. I don't have any money, Rowan. The car is a lease in the company name. The apartment is in Dad's name. The credit cards are supplementary to his account. If I don't go back, I have nothing. You have a degree, I said. And you have a brain. And you're not in jail. I don't have this, he said, looking around the room with a hunger I recognized. I don't have autonomy. I'm 22 years old and I've never made a decision they didn't approve first. I walked over to my desk and opened the top drawer. I pulled out a heavy, cream-colored envelope. The handwriting on the front was shaky but elegant. Grandma left a letter, I said quietly. With the trust documents. She wrote one for me, and she wrote one for you. But she told the lawyer not to give you yours until you asked for it, until you stepped away from them. Caleb looked up, his eyes red-rimmed, the color drained from his face. She wrote me a letter? She knew, Cal. She knew they had their claws in you. I held out the envelope. She said you'd come looking for it when you were ready to be your own man. He stared at the paper as if it were a bomb. His hand trembled as he reached out, his fingers brushing against the wax seal. This was the moment. The golden child was finally about to hear the truth from the only person our parents hadn't been able to silence. The wax seal cracked with a sound that seemed too loud in the quiet apartment. Caleb pulled the folded parchment out with shaking fingers. He didn't look at me. He was entirely focused on the handwriting that neither of us had seen in 5 years. He began to read, his lips moving silently at first, then stopping as his breath hitched. Read it, I said softly. He swallowed hard, his voice rough. My dearest Caleb, if you are reading this, it means you have finally walked away. It means you have finally found the courage I always knew you had, buried under all that obedience. Caleb paused, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. He took a shaky breath and continued. I knew your father and mother would try to keep you. They see children as investments, not people. I knew if I left you money directly, they would absorb it, manage it, and use it as a leash to keep you in line. They would tell you it was for your own good, while they spent it on their image. So, I did something they will hate. Caleb looked up at me, his eyes wide with disbelief. I created a contingency trust. It is not as large as Rowan's, because she had to build from nothing. But it is enough. It is enough for tuition, enough for an apartment, enough to start over. But there was a condition. The funds could only be released to you upon proof that you have severed financial ties with Mark and Diana, or that they have cut you off. I wanted to fund your freedom, Caleb, not your cage. Go be an architect, build something real. The paper fluttered to the floor. Caleb sat there, stunned. For his entire adult life, he had been operating under the assumption that he was trapped, that without our parents' approval, he would starve. He believed the narrative that he was helpless without their guidance. And all this time, Grandma June had placed a safety net beneath him, waiting for him to jump. She knew, he whispered. She knew I wanted to be an architect. I only told her once, when I was 16. She listened, I said. Unlike them. He leaned back in the armchair, staring at the ceiling, tears finally spilling over and tracking down his cheeks. They weren't tears of sadness, they were tears of relief. The tension that had held his shoulders up near his ears for 4 years finally snapped. I'm free, he said. It wasn't a question. I don't have to go back. I don't have to take the job at the firm. I don't have to listen to Dad lecture me about brand management ever again. No, I said. You don't. He looked at me, and for the first time in forever, I saw my brother. Not the golden child, not the rival, but the boy who used to build intricate forts out of couch cushions. But where do I go? He asked, wiping his face. I can't go back to the apartment to get my stuff. Dad probably changed the locks by now. Let him keep the stuff, I said. It's all suits and ties anyway. You don't need them. I stood up and walked over to the key hook by the door. I grabbed a spare set of keys, silver, unpolished, and heavy. Unit 3B is empty, I said, tossing the keys to him. He caught them instinctively. The previous tenant moved out last week. It needs a paint job, and the water pressure in the shower is finicky. But the light is good, perfect for drafting tables. Caleb looked at the keys in his hand. He looked at me. Rent? Friends and family discount. I grinned. But don't be late. The landlord is a real stickler. He laughed, a genuine, deep laugh that sounded rusty from disuse. Thanks, Rowan. Seriously. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, I said, walking to the window and looking out at the street below. We still have to deal with the fallout. Mom and Dad aren't going to go quietly. They lost their leverage, they lost their reputation, and they lost their retirement plan. I looked back at him. They're going to come for us. Let them, Caleb said, clutching the keys tight. We own the building. And come for us they did. For 3 months after graduation, Mark and Diana unleashed a legal blizzard. They tried to contest Grandma June's will, claiming undue influence. They tried to claim Caleb was mentally unstable to freeze his trust access. They even tried to report my building for code violations, hoping to bankrupt me with fines. But they forgot one crucial detail. Grandma June had anticipated their greed. The trust documents were ironclad, wrapped in layers of legal protection that not even Mark's high-priced country club lawyers could penetrate. And as for the building, I had Mr. Henderson and the other tenants on my side. When the inspectors came, they found a building that was loved, maintained, and up to code. They lost. Again. A year later, the dust has finally settled. I sat on the roof of the building, the warm Boston evening air smelling of grilled burgers and charcoal. We had turned the flat rooftop into a community garden and patio, Caleb's first official design project as an architecture student. He had drawn up the plans, and the tenants had chipped in to build the planters. Caleb was over by the grill, wearing a t-shirt covered in charcoal dust, laughing as Mrs. Gable scolded him about overcooking the corn. He looked different now. The heavy, polished armor of the golden child was gone. He looked tired. Sure, architecture school was brutal, but he looked alive. He had traded the Capitol Grill for rooftop potlucks, and he had never been happier. "Burgers up, landlord!" he shouted, waving a spatula at me. I smiled, taking a sip of my lemonade. "Coming!" I walked over to the edge of the roof, looking out over the Allston skyline. To the east, the lights of Boston University twinkled. Somewhere down there, in a generic luxury condo in Florida, Mark and Diana were likely sitting in pristine, quiet rooms, telling themselves they were the victims. We hadn't spoken to them since that day on Commonwealth Avenue. They had tried to reach out once, around Christmas. A card arrived, addressed to both of us. No apology, no check, just a stiff "thinking of you," and a request to discuss the future of the family estate. We burned it in this very grill. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a notification from the bank. The monthly rent roll had cleared. The building was fully occupied, the mortgage was paid, and the savings account for my next property was growing. I thought back to that moment in the arena. I remembered the venom in my mother's voice when she said, "If you don't live under our roof, you don't get our support." She had meant it as a curse. She wanted me to feel cold, exposed, and vulnerable. She wanted me to come crawling back, begging for entry into their fortress of control. But looking around the roof at Caleb laughing with the neighbors, at the string lights twinkling above the garden we built, at the brick and mortar that belonged to me, I realized she had actually given me a blessing. She was right. I didn't live with them anymore. I didn't live in a house of conditions. I didn't live in a home where love was a currency you had to earn with obedience. I lived here, in a building bought with grit and a grandmother's secret love. I lived in a sanctuary where I set the rent, I set the rules, and most importantly, I set the table. Caleb walked over, handing me a paper plate with a perfectly charred burger. "What are you thinking about?" I took the plate, looking at my brother, my tenant, my family. "I was just thinking," I said, taking a bite. "They really did me a favor." "Yeah?" Caleb leaned against the railing. Looking out at the city he was finally learning to build. "How's that?" "They told me to go find my own place," I said, clinking my plastic cup against his. "So I bought the whole damn block."